Hi folks, this is Dr. Kat Shrier presenting the keys to water in Congress, how you can track, testify on, and transform water policy on Capitol Hill. What we're going to talk about today is what does Congress have to do with water, and why should you care? Who is it who comes to Congress to talk about water, and can water citizens really make a difference? What is the Water Citizen Network? We're going to talk about the 2013 Water in Congress review we conducted and the new 2014 Keys to Water in Congress program, charter class forming now, how you can get involved. Please stay to the end of the webinar for a special gift. Before we get rolling, I want to ask you, why do we care about water in Congress? Isn't water a local issue? By the way, beneath this webinar, you should see a chat box, and I will look forward to seeing your comments in that chat box. So as we go, please feel free to type your responses. So is water local? This is a question we posed at the Water Smart Innovations Conference held in Las Vegas, Nevada. And we got a lot of responses along the lines of yes, water is local to your watershed, it is local to your municipality, it is local to your house, it's even local to your bloodstream. We also sat down with Pat Mulroy, the head of the Southern Nevada Water Authority in Las Vegas Valley Water District. Let's hear what Pat had to say on the matter.
A lot of people always say water is local, and I say, wait a minute. There is a triangle: water, food, energy. Water is local if all your food is grown locally. Whether it's beef, whether it's fish, whether it's chicken, whether it's agricultural products, unless everything is grown locally, water is not local. If your energy is all produced locally within your community, then your water is local. We have a global economy where food is shipped around the world and where the world is dependent on agricultural production, be it from the United States, be it from Australia, be it from Europe. When it falls apart, it causes hunger in another part of the world. So it's not people have a hard time seeing that it is part of an intricate web of the global economy. And the reason for that is they don't understand how critically important water is to all economic endeavors. You can't have a vibrant economy. You can't have economic growth. You can't have economic recovery without a reliable, sustainable water supply. It all falls apart. So it's local in some ways, but it is very global in many other ways.
So you see, there's different ways that we can think about water. That yes, water is local, but it's also connected to other parts of the economy, and it's also connected to the entire planet. But is water federal? Well, now this is an area where we hear a lot of folks jumping up and down at the state level saying, no, water is a state issue, especially in the western states that have prior appropriation legal doctrine or water rights. Say the states are responsible for water, not the federal government. Well, a couple of years ago, 2012, Congressional Research Service came out with their report. This is the nonpartisan research body in the Library of Congress that is there to support Congress on getting the background information on different issues. And they were asked to look at water programs throughout the federal government. And as you can see, they found 26 federal agency water programs. 26 different water programs in federal agencies. And these programs were not just in the so-called water agencies. This question of what is or isn't a water agency has come up numerous times, particularly recently as people have looked at the nexus between water and should energy agencies be involved with water. So the water agencies And if you think about it, what do you think would be a federal agency that has some kind of role in our water? Well, one is the Environmental Protection Agency, that we have certain basic minimum standards with respect to drinking water quality, with respect to water in the environment. And if you've traveled around the world, you know what it's like to be in countries where you can't drink the water, or where there is more pollution in the environment than what we have and enjoy in this country here. And a lot of that is tied to the work that's been done by the Environmental Protection Agency. Another agency that is considered a water agency is the Corps of Engineers, which is actually a part of the U.S. Army. But this is the organization that deals with ports and harbors, with navigation, with flood control, as well as environmental restoration, things like wetlands. Finally, over at U.S. Department of Interior, and in particular the Bureau of Reclamation, which is part of the Interior Department, which is responsible for water projects in the western 17 states, many of which have hydropower. Between Bureau of Reclamation and Corps of Engineers, you see most of the hydropower projects in this country. And between those two agencies, because they do so much work in terms of water supply, in terms of flood control on big federal projects, they also work with the state and local water providers on planning, as well as other interests throughout those river basins throughout the United States. But it's not just those agencies that are looking at water strictly from a perspective of management of water or water quality, but also from other sectors. So you heard Pat talk about the nexus between water and food, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture has many, many programs related to irrigation, water for crops, water for livestock, water for crops to feed the livestock, water for the impacts associated with different approaches to land management, to crop rotations and management, as well as the fact that so many of our rural communities are tied to agricultural production. A lot of rural economic development activities are tied in with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, including water to support those communities. Department of Energy, another area that we've talked about already, water for extraction of different sorts of energy, of oil and gas, of coal, water associated with power. And anytime you use energy to generate power, to generate heat, you're going to need something to cool down that heat after you've created the power. So water is very often used as cooling water associated with power. There's also been increasing understanding of the energy required for water itself, for pumping water, for treating water. Now, Department of Health is also an important sector. The health aspects associated with water, that so much of human health is tied to the water that we drink and the quality of that water, and diseases that can be carried through water, like E. coli, which is shown here, as well as understanding human behavior and how we can have an impact on our own health through washing our hands, through drinking more water. Here is a photo of Michelle Obama teaching kids about drinking more water for their health. And we can also think about the federal functions of government. And you look at the preamble of the Constitution, to provide for the common defense, to promote the general welfare. All of these areas have some sort of water aspect to them. For example, looking at water security. This has been a big issue, an increasing issue in the Department of Defense and the different branches of the military, understanding things like how to get water to our war fighters, that we have so many casualties associated with getting energy and water to the folks on the front lines, how important stabilizing water supply is to stabilizing regions where we do have our armed forces, as well as looking at the military installations here at home and the bases, and how, so many of you can probably think of a military base, an Air Force base, an Army, Navy, Marines, something close to where you live. and how they're part of the demand for water supplies, for the impacts on water quality. And there's been a lot of work done lately on military installations to improve the sustainability of water here stateside. Now, Department of State has little pieces of the United States all over the planet. We have embassies in the driest and wettest cities on Earth. And Department of State Office of Building Services has the responsibility of making sure that we have water for those entities and that there is resiliency regardless of what's going on around those facilities. So, for example, here we see the U.S. Embassy in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and when the earthquake hit in Haiti, this was one of the few buildings left in the entire city that still had water and power because it had that self-sufficient supply, because it had that resiliency. So many of the rescue operations, the Red Cross, for example, they were staying at the U.S. Embassy because they had that resiliency and water supply on those facilities. Of course, the U.S. is also very involved internationally with aid to developing countries, with water and sanitation and health, all tied into water quality. Although there is also certainly a security aspect associated with that when there is not enough water, or when there are water quality impacts, that impacts ability to grow food, to develop economies, that can lead to instability in different regions around the world. So there is a security aspect to that. And here at home again, we see the Federal Emergency Management Agency is within Department of Homeland Security, because it is so important when we are stricken with disasters, and so many water-related disasters, of hurricanes, Superstorm Sandy, of floods in the Mississippi, that when we are impacted by these water-related disasters and how well we can recover from those disasters is really critical for our nation's security as well. Now, another important role of the federal government is in helping to provide data and information and models that we use every day to make decisions related to water, whether that is about what the weather is going to be outside, whether that's understanding stream flow and whether there's going to be flooding in our areas, whether there's a drought coming. A lot of that comes from federally generated data through stream gauges and monitoring systems, and Landsat imagery from NASA, National Weather Service, which is actually a part of Department of Commerce, because it's so important for commerce, for trade, for economy. There's an organization, an entity called the Advisory Committee on Water Information, and I'm part of the Sustainable Water Resources Roundtable within that, which is bringing together federal agencies that develop water information with states and localities and researchers and private entities that use that information to try to figure out better ways of providing information, to blend private and other sources of information with federally developed information. And in the case of the Sustainable Water Resources Roundtable, how we can think about that in a more holistic manner. There's also a lot of money was spent on research, supporting researchers who are working on water information. Now, another area we want to look at is, and this is one of the areas where a lot of people may not be conscious of it, but are interacting with federal lands, is through recreation. When we go to national parks, when we go to the Statue of Liberty, when we go for recreation, for kayaking, for fishing, so often we're going to areas that are part of public lands, and so often part of federal lands. There's also the U.S. Forest Service, which is actually part of Department of Agriculture, essentially like a crop, a resource. But so many of our ski areas, we have the Winter Olympics coming up, and our U.S. skiers were training in forests, in ski resorts. Chances are most of those were somehow within the area of U.S. Forest Service land. Then there's the money side, that the federal government is involved in financial backing for for municipal bonds, for example, for city bonds related to water projects. The Recovery Act, many of the Recovery Act projects were related to water. Trade representative, that we are exporting water technologies, that we are leaders in water technology in so many areas, and how do we develop new markets across the globe. So there are actually financial aspects. You see little pots of money associated with water throughout the government. In addition, there is the role of the federal government in terms of managing its own operations. There have been a series of executive orders, the most recent being 13514. I tend to refer to that as greening the federal house, how the federal agencies look at their water. And one of the interesting things that happened when agencies started looking at their sustainability plans, they call them, is it used to be that the federal government, like so many other folks, looked at water primarily as being about taps and toilets, as being about lawn irrigation, and perhaps not as important as things like energy and carbon footprint, greenhouse gases. But in fact, when at a larger scale, the federal government started looking at ways to hit targets for reduction in energy use, in carbon footprint, in greenhouse gases, as well as these other areas shown here, transportation, land consumption, that so often some of the best ways to do that was through water systems, through more efficient ways of heating water, of piping water through a building. As the federal government started looking at some more unusual cases of historic buildings, of 24-hour facilities like prisons in the Department of Justice, like hospitals in the Veterans Administration, needing super sanitized water or hydrotherapy, and the heating and cooling that goes with that water, and being able to look at that at a large scale, because really the federal government is the largest purchaser of anything on the planet. If you put all the purchasing power of the federal government of the United States into one pot. So to be able to see the impact on energy, on carbon, on money spent on sustainability, you get a new perspective on the role of water. So we were here to talk about Congress. So what did all this have to do with Congress? Well, any federal activities, any of these federal water programs have oversight, have authorization by the U.S. Congress. And the money for those programs comes from Congress. And when there is uncertainty in the budget, and when we had the federal shutdown just a few short weeks ago, every single one of those 26 federal water programs, as well as all of the affiliated state programs and local programs and the private activities and the contractors who are paid by the federal government and the programs are affected by the federal government, were all impacted by that shutdown. We're all impacted by congressional budget uncertainty. So when Congress shut down, so did the National Mall. Got another question for you. Does water flow uphill or downhill? Please type your response below. Of course, physically, and this is something that people sometimes forget, physically water flows downhill. Or if you're dealing with groundwater, you've got different pressure heads and water flows from high head to low head, but at the ground surface, we're looking at water flowing downhill. Although there is a famous quote by the Colorado governor, John Love, who later became energy czar for Nixon, water flows uphill towards money. In this case, of course, it's a trick question because both water and money for the water programs flow down from the hill. So how is water addressed on the hill? What do we know about water in Congress? There are, as identified in the same Congressional Research Service report, there are 15 congressional committees that have some responsibility for a federal water program, have some responsibility for water. And they're shown here. These are the ones listed in that CRS report on the House side and the Senate side. One of the things you're going to notice is the House and the Senate do things a little differently. And they don't always divide up the different programs the same way between their different committees. And as you may remember from civics class, House has 435 members, Senate only has 100. So you got fewer people in the Senate covering the same number of issues, the same number of different programs. Some of the committees are responsible for authorization and oversight. Others are responsible for appropriations for the money side. So the approval, the authorization has to come out of one committee, and then the money for it from somewhere else. There's different jurisdictions. In some cases, water programs develop because an individual member said, this is important to me. I want to do a bill on water, but I'm not in that committee. I'm in this committee. So let's put it in this agency. Now, the House and Senate have their own rules and procedures. And again, those are different. For example, the Senate has something called preponderance, that if a bill involves more than one agency, they'll figure out which committee it goes to in that sort of lead committee. And on the House side, you may have multiple committees getting involved. But the House and Senate, they have rules, they have procedures, they have processes, and those can change. They can change their own rules to some extent. So if you really want to understand what's going on in water in Congress, you gotta have to go a little bit beyond Schoolhouse Rock. Although, if you listen to the words of that old song, which some of us remember as an introduction to how a bill becomes a law, and it's available on YouTube if you want to look it up. I'm just a bill sitting here on Capitol Hill, and it's a long, long time that I'm sitting in committee. Well, I'm not going to sing the whole thing, but you know, it's someone writes a bill, and it goes through one house, it goes through the committee, and then it passes, yes, 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 and the member, sometimes it passes, sometimes it doesn't. Then the member goes over to the other side and hopefully has somebody already lined up there who's going to pass it through, walk it through the other house, and oh, look, here you have just a few weeks ago, the conference committee, where the House, this is Bill Schuster and Congressman Bill Schuster and Senator Barbara Boxer from the two committees in the House and Senate, respectively, who passed their versions of the bill that oversees water resources activities from the Corps of Engineers. So how do they get those two bills into one bill that then goes to the President for signature? And that's how our laws are made. So people who are involved with water on an ongoing basis, on a professional basis, or involved with a cause, sooner or later, everybody in water comes to Washington. And often it's through various water organizations. And there are a lot of water organizations. There are industry associations. There are professional associations. So you might have an industry association like the water utilities. You might have a professional association like the civil engineers. You might have advocacy groups that are focused on particular issues and causes, the environment, for example. You might have technical and educational organizations. There are also federations of state and local entities, utilities that are impacted by what's going on in Congress with the federal programs, who want to know what's going on there, even if they're not actually directly asking for any kind of changes within Congress. And by the way, I live here on Capitol Hill over by Eastern Market, and it's just a short walk up to Congress. So a lot of times I know a lot of the folks at these different organizations, so when they come to the Hill, I might tootle on over to Capitol Hill and see what they have to say at a hearing or an event. And they all come, and often we'll have an event called a fly-in, where the members of these different organizations from all over the country will come to Capitol Hill at the same time, and they come to advocate in some cases. In other cases, just to tell their story, to inform, to advise Congress, to be informed, to find out what's going on. And I want to emphasize that this is really critical work, and it's important to Congress to know that people are coming on behalf of an organization, that they're working with others throughout the country that have a particular issue that they're involved with. But there is typically some level of preparation for the members. Might be some videos that they watch or a webinar or two before they come out to DC. More often there's maybe a speaker on the program where they'll get briefings from different agencies, they'll get briefings from their own members, and they might get a briefing from someone who says, you know, this is how it's going to go. You're going to go in and you're going to have a meeting, and it's probably not with a member, it's probably with a staff person, maybe a 24-year-old staff person who's in charge of the water issues, and you need to be ready and provide them the talking points, etc. Often there is not a whole lot of coordination between the different organizations from what I've seen. There is some, for example, American Water Works Association and the Water Environment Federation, which is the water and wastewater utilities, respectively, will work together. But in many cases, there will be a water hearing on one side of the hill in one committee and a water hearing on another side of the hill in another committee. And for a lot of members of Congress, and especially for the staff, it's sort of, you know, wait a minute, why do we need to talk about water? Didn't we just talk about water yesterday? So there isn't always a lot of clarity about what the difference is between the different organizations, what the similarities are, how it fits into the bigger picture, and how the different groups can work together. But overall, it's a tremendous effort, and a lot of time and money that's spent by folks coming here to DC, by folks investing in getting involved and contacting their members, however it is that they do so, as individuals or as organizations. And it's not just the organizations that get involved. It's really the entire water community, basically these people who are passionate about water, what we call water citizens. And let me see if I can get my pointer working here. Basically, one of the things that we've seen at the Water Citizen Network is that so much of the activity around water is focused on this top of the pyramid, the water sector professionals, people who are working for a water utility or water equipment manufacturing or an engineering consulting firm on water. But there's so many more people who are passionate about water and really interested and recognize that they have interest in water, including other sectors like energy, like agriculture, that have a focus on water. You've got these folks above the line who are sort of, they're paid to think about water to some respect, but many folks are involved with water and it's not their primary profession, it's not their primary source of income. And that includes sort of this middle of the pyramid, this water volunteers and civic leaders. That also includes members of boards, really critical group here, because the staff, the professionals within many of our water utilities are directed by their water boards and their approval for projects and things like that based on the water boards, who may or may not have an extensive background in water, or they certainly have a commitment to water and involvement in those water boards. We also have people who are working more at a personal level, water conscious consumers, investors. That also includes voters. People do think about water when they vote. And finally, you've got the water enthusiasts, people who are just, gosh, as soon as I got out of work, I am on the water, in the water, under the water, kayaking, scuba diving, sitting by my fountain in my backyard, whatever. Many of these people, you know, this is often the gateway. This is where the engagement begins, is people become passionate about water, and then they start to think about water in their daily lives, in their involvement in volunteer activities, eventually may even incorporate it into their work and say, you know what, I'm going to quit my job, go work in the water field. Often it just starts at that enthusiast level. So we really try to involve people at the Water Citizen Network. We try to think about the full spectrum of who is it who is thinking about water, who is passionate about water. And when it comes to water in Congress, we look at, one of the areas certainly is all those federal employees who were working on water programs, who were out of work, sitting at home during the government shutdown, as well as all the contractors and researchers and state agency programs dependent on federal funding. These are all folks who, whether they advocate or not, they're certainly affected by water in Congress and have an interest in water in Congress. There's business leaders. We see here Rich Musin from Milwaukee, which is an area that's looking at becoming a water cluster. This is Sally Gutierrez from EPA, who's been working with these water clusters to bring together the public-private sector and researchers to develop economic centers of excellence around water, as well as entrepreneurs who are looking to save the world with new technologies and new gadgets and widgets and whatnots related to water that can get support from federal funding and related to water. Certainly we talk about the advocates, the civil leaders, the professionals, the experts, and people working more at a personal level. So can these water citizens really make a difference on Capitol Hill? And one area where we certainly think about people getting involved on Capitol Hill at a personal level is among the advocates. And this photo here is actually something that I was at a photo shoot with Susan Holmes from Save Our Wild Salmon, who looked at how Congress can support stakeholder processes and bringing together different stakeholders to talk about salmon issues. And she's also worked on a number of other environmental issues. Says educating Congress and their staff is a process. You need to go in there with positive thoughts and recognize that the public can educate members of Congress and can change their mind. So you have a lot of folks who begin going to the Hill and keep going to the Hill year after year to provide information on different issues. Mike Bowman is another gentleman that we've talked with about the work that he's done on the Hill, farming and energy issues and rural economic development issues, and recognizing how water is tied into all of those different issues. For example, he works with a lot of folks, farmers who want to do more with renewable energy and grow crops for energy use, not just corn, but cellulosic waste crops that can be very beneficial in terms of renewable energy sources and carbon footprint and that sort of thing. But there's programs that are at cross purposes within the federal government. So, for example, crop insurance might not apply to these sorts of crops. So you'll see folks like Mike who can go from agency to agency, can go from congressional committee to congressional committee, and say, what you're doing over here really affects what's happening over there, and we need to think about this in a more holistic and integrated manner. And for a lot of the folks on the Hill, even the folks on the Hill don't really know what the other folks on the Hill are doing with respect on water, because their focus is on their committee, their state, their issues. And so it's really up to citizens who are working with these issues to raise that awareness of that interconnectivity. Another area where folks really get involved is as experts. And this is really not really asking for something to be changed or asking for a bill to be passed or not passed. This is about providing expertise and what is the state of the technology, what is the latest understanding. We have folks like Jeanette Brown, who is the former president of the Water Environment Federation, which is all the wastewater utilities, talking about how the most important aspect was developing credibility, that if we said something, you could back it up with technical support, that they could trust you. Here she's talking about the relationship that experts have with members of Congress and their staff, and being able to provide that information in a timely manner so that policies can be made that really reflect the latest understanding of science, of technology, of economics, of society. There's a book that Roger Pilkey, who is a climate expert out of Colorado, wrote a couple of years ago called The Honest Broker, Making Sense of Science and Policy and Politics. And really that role, that responsibility of folks who are experts to learn how to effectively communicate, not in a fire hose university lecture style presentation, but in the proper format for a hearing on Capitol Hill. You also see folks on the Hill, and we see folks on the Hill who are more involved because of something that's happening at a personal level or at a community level. People who are somehow motivated to become activists. This may not be their ongoing life purpose, but something has happened that has triggered them to become an activist. And here we see Nancy Freeman out of Arizona. Here she was just she had been a researcher out in California, and she retired. And she went to a retirement community in Arizona, a nice place to retire, lots of sun. And there was an issue with groundwater in her community. So she did what she knew how to do, and she began doing research, and she began going to the state agency and looking up information about water and pulling it together into a research report, which she sent to members of Congress. And it happened that they were having a field hearing in Arizona with members of Congress, and they invited Nancy to speak. And so she gets up there and she says, "My name is Nancy Freeman, the Groundwater Awareness League." And the congressman said, "I know who you are. I wouldn't have been able to do half of what I'm doing today if it weren't for you." So really, there's a great appreciation for those folks who do take the time to put the information together in a usable format and get it to members of Congress and their staff. Another person, I'm a huge fan of Mark Shiley's. He is a great guy. He was just this financial advisor living in this nice little suburb of Denver in Douglas County, Colorado, with his wife and kids, and a member of the water utility nearby came up to him and said, "You know what? We've got some water issues here locally, and there's no one mean enough to deal with this issue but you. So we need you to get involved." And we did a story on Mark the other day where he's talking about how he just bought a ticket and flew out to the Lincoln Memorial, and he sat on the steps and he looked out at Congress and said, "God, do I really want to get involved in all this?" But as a citizen, he said, "You know what? I'm going to do it." So let's hear what Mark had to say about his experience.
I came on my own in May of 2005, and I didn't even wear a jacket. I just wore a shirt. I did wear a tie, and I asked, "How does this work?" So that was May of 2005. I bought my own ticket. I just flew to D.C. and asked, "How does this work?" Much like I asked you on the bus in June of 2004, "How does this work?" So I'd mowed through all your list of people. So I needed new people to ask, "How does this work?"
Poor Mark. He ended up sitting next to me on a bus for a tour of the Denver aquifers at a groundwater conference, and asked me about all these different water organizations and how he could learn more about water. And he's been doing a great job out there. So how about you? I mean, you're here for a webinar on water in Congress. I assume you've had some kind of experience along these lines. What have been your experiences working with members of Congress and their staff, whether it's the offices here in D.C. or back in your home state? Have you come to the Hill? Have you written a letter to a member of Congress? How did you learn what you know? One of the things we've been looking at the Water Citizen Network is there a better way to learn how to be an effective water citizen on Capitol Hill? Before we answer that question, I think we ought to first address something I haven't talked about yet, which is what is the Water Citizen Network and who am I? So the Water Citizen Network is a network created to provide water news, education, and watertainment for people passionate about water, what we refer to as water citizens. So it's a network both in terms of the people themselves and in terms of various communications vehicles. You think about a Discovery Channel on water or a Huffington Post on water. We have a news site, Water Citizen News. We have watertainment, videos, concerts, whatnot, all in the works, as well as education products. We've done profiles of leaders in the water community. For example, we did a series on Hispanic water leaders. This is Albert Robles from the Water Replenishment District out in California, and what his family's story is and related to water, how they came to this country, and how water's really shaped his life. And that's true for so many people who are involved with water, their story, their family stories. We capture those stories. Our mission overall is to elevate the water dialogue, meaning to really help improve the way we talk about water, improve our understanding about water, to bring people together around water. And we're looking to improve the water communications infrastructure. There's been a lot of talk lately about water infrastructure in terms of aging infrastructure, in terms of pipes and water treatment facilities, but there is also a need for water communications infrastructure, get information out, and in a format that people can access, both in terms of physically access and in terms of how it's being communicated, so people can understand. And a part of that is make water sexy. How do we present information about water, not just in a crisis, oh my God, we're all going to die, they're poisoning our water, they're stealing our water, but in a much more positive and engaging way of making water sexy. And I am Dr. Kat Shrier. I've been in water resources planning and policy for over 25 years now. I actually started out on the policy side. I had been an intern for my state legislator in New Jersey since my junior year of high school. Eventually I worked my way over to the U.S. Senator's office and down here to Washington, D.C. Then went down to Richmond, worked with a state legislator there, and switched over to an environmental consulting firm that was doing a lot of government contracts and began coursework and whatnot to get degrees in geology and civil engineering and environmental management. And throughout my career, I've sort of been in this role of planner, of facilitator, of expert, of this neutral party that brings everybody together, and as a non-stakeholder, which is unusual in water, that everyone talks about stakeholders having some stake on one side or another in an issue. I had been working for a very large environmental consulting firm. I was being groomed, working my way up through the ranks to become an associate, to be the first woman associate in the engineering division in the history of this global company. And I actually walked into a personal leadership program in Calgary, Canada, where I was on assignment for a couple of years working on oil sands and water issues up there, and went to this Creators Code personal leadership program, and it kind of started a shift where I was thinking more about how I could create a bigger impact and what more I could do. Packed up, moved back to Capitol Hill, where I had started many, many years ago, back in 2007. Hung my shingle as WaterCat Consulting, and I was working on innovations in water and what was holding back innovations. In many cases, as with aquifer storage, as with water reuse, as with integrated management of water and energy resources, the technology and understanding was often there, but it was often the planning, policy, public perception sorts of things that were creating some issues that people were looking to address. So I was spending more and more of my time on just basic education and communications programs. And so, there needs to be an entity to address that. That's not just sort of a little side task associated with a larger engineering project or a policy initiative. So I started to create yet another nonprofit, National Water Education Foundation, but soon realized that the organizations that are best at communications are really the communications industry. And so I went back to school again for multimedia journalism and began this communications venture, this Water Citizen Network and Water Citizen News, which is at watercitizen.com. And then this past year began the first education component of Water Citizen, which is this Keys to Water in Congress program at waterandcongress.com. So, how did we start to develop a program on education for water citizens on Water in Congress? Well, we began with a review. In this past year, talking with Congressional Research Service staff, including the folks who were involved with this study that came out in 2012, talked with staff of congressional offices, personal staff, and committee staff on Capitol Hill, as well as members of Congress. We talked with leaders of different agencies throughout the federal government, water associations, private water companies, manufacturers, businesses, some of the top government relations experts, as well as these water citizens involved with Congress, some of the folks that you met earlier, Mark Shively and Susan Holmes and Mike Bowman and the rest. And our goal really was to identify those commonalities, those keys to water in Congress, that regardless of the issue, regardless of the background, that folks could understand these keys to water in Congress. Make it available to a broader audience of not necessarily professionals, something certainly of value to the professionals, but also for folks who more generally are people passionate about water and who take the time and the initiative and the interest in learning more. And something that people can do on their own time, their own dime, perhaps before they come to Washington with an organization, or just are able to do from home. We did this from the premise that it's important to ask not what Congress knows about water, but ask what water citizens know about Congress. That's an important step, we think. What we found was, first of all, that Congress is involved in every aspect of water in society. We talked about that earlier. And that Congress wants to hear from you. This is Grace Napolitano, probably one of the most knowledgeable people on water issues. She's on 2 of the major water committees on the House side, was a former chair of Water and Power, now the ranking minority member in that committee. That you need to educate, we need you to educate us all in what you know. And you need to hear from us what some of our concerns are and will continue to be. So there really is that interest in hearing from you. There are established practices and procedures. There's etiquette and how things get done. But there are also new opportunities that have developed around how people can interact with Congress, how they can hear from members of Congress. And this is a former member of Congress, President Barack Obama, having a Google Hangout. There's Twitter town halls. There's YouTube videos that have been released about water issues. And that goes in both directions, that people can create videos of what's going on at home and send that to members of Congress. Congresswoman Napolitano recommended using video conferences as a first step before you fly out here, to go ahead and do the initial background through a video conference. Basically, some really good opportunities to spend less money, make better use of your time, and be more effective for yourself, for your community, for your organization. Water in Congress is complex, but is understandable, and there are some common elements regarding, regardless of the issue, the policy, the position, the party, and it's one of the less partisan issues on the Hill. So whether you're coming as an advocate, as an expert, or as a community activist, or just have a story that you need to share on water, you can be involved in Water in Congress. But as Representative Bill Pascrell from New Jersey says, you better know what you're talking about. If you're going to come talk to a congressman, don't waste their time. They don't have a lot of time. They're working on every issue you can possibly imagine. They've got to jump from place to place. They have very little time, but they are interested. So how can you present that information, show that you know what you're talking about? To do that, it's really critical to understand these keys to water in Congress, about the processes and protocols, how things get done, and when, the people in the committee, who does what, and the different ways to participate, more traditional and newer methods that are available, how you can get involved. But where can you find these keys to water in Congress? How can you learn all this? How can you gain the knowledge, the tools, the support you need to know more, be heard, and make a difference? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because now, drum roll, please. I'm serious. You guys, you got to do the drum roll. Okay. Water Citizen Network is proud to present the 2014 Keys to Water in Congress program. What is the 2014 Keys to Water in Congress program? It is a comprehensive program for water citizens, for people who are passionate about water, on water in Congress. That includes a 6-week intensive, interactive, web-based course on the processes, the people, the ways to participate, including both recorded and live aspects to it. A 1-year access to a private online classroom. So if you can't make it to the individual courses, all of these are being recorded and posted on this online classroom. In addition, there are several tools that are being developed, and announcements and other materials and apps and whatnot that will be posted up on this private classroom community, which the folks within the Keys to Water in Congress program will have the opportunity to try out first and use in your own Water in Congress strategy. Now, in addition to the classroom component, there is a private online community for members of the class. And so I'm assuming most of you are familiar with Facebook. If you've used Facebook, it's very different from these private group pages, which really have the impact of being part of a class in person, that you have the opportunity to interact with other people within the class. If you don't know how to post messages or respond to messages or put up videos, we can help you with that, or I'm sure you can ask your kids or your parents or your grandparents to help you figure that out. But very quickly, I've been involved with many of these courses, and very quickly people can become engaged and get to know the other members of the class through this private Facebook group, which is just for people within the class, and nobody else can see this, but it gives you that opportunity to really interact with each other and say, hey, has anyone talked to anyone on this committee, or does anyone know of a member of Congress who's a big fly fisherman? Does anyone have talking points on this issue or that issue? And be able to exchange with each other and draw upon that community way beyond what we can do within the individual classroom setting. So we put all this together into this comprehensive program. We're using an experiential learning model, so you're not just going to be sitting back and listening and looking at PowerPoint. You're also going to have a chance to get involved during the presentations as well as on this online community. We're combining content with coaching and community. We'll have lots of Q&As so that you can talk about, this is what we're looking at doing with our Water in Congress strategy. Does anyone else have any experience with that? You put all this together, and this has been shown to be the most effective approach to adult learning. We remember, 30% or so of what we hear, 55% of what we hear and see, but over 85% of what we hear, see, and do. And that doing part comes through combining content, community, and coaching. So putting all that together, we are now opening up enrollment for this charter class for $997 a year, as well as providing a monthly payment option. Recognizing, a lot of people are doing this out of pocket. Monthly payment option of $97 a month. to have access to all this for the entire year. We are looking for, we are looking to find folks who are ready to commit right up front. So we have a bonus available for those folks who do pay in full, where you'll get a one-on-one consultation, and we'll go over what issues you're looking at on the Hill and who else is working on those issues, what committees deal with those issues, what members are interested in those issues, and that can get you off on a good start for 2014. Registration is open now at waterandcongress.com/quick, KWIC, keys to water and congress.html. Now, when we put this together, we looked at this program and said, is that enough? Is that really going to give everyone what they need to hit the ground running in 2014 in Water in Congress? What else can we do to prepare this first charter class of the Keys to Water in Congress program? So what we've done is we put together some additional bonuses. For members of the 2014 charter class, if we receive your registration by December 31st, 2013, needed by the end of the year. So number one is we put together a guide that basically pulls together the information from the Congressional Research Service, from the websites from the various committees that are involved with water, from other information, into a handy guide that you'll be able to download, have available on your smartphone as you go stomping around the Hill, to have that information of who does what, where their office is, what phone number to call, who are the key people on those committees, not just the members but also the staff, and that is free with early enrollment. Second is we recognize that throughout the year there are going to be different issues coming up, and there are certain issues that certainly we know are going to come up regardless of water and security, water and food, water and energy, water and infrastructure, water and money, and we're developing this monthly program of bringing in some of the top thought leaders on these issues, having interviews and opportunities for you to interact through questions and answers with those thought leaders. Again, $9.97 per year or $97 per month, free, again, with the early enrollment for this charter class. Finally, we are having an event called the Water in Congress Experience. This is an opportunity to come out to Washington at a time when it's not part of a fly-in, when it's not part of a down the hill sort of thing, where you're so focused on what talking points you have to bring to what members and where you have to be when and everything, but really get to know the lay of the land, get to know your way around, have a hands-on workshop before you come back to work on your issue. We're going to make it a lot of fun, have a scavenger hunt. There's this down at the bottom, you see the only water fountain in one of the congressional office buildings. I won't tell you which one because you're going to have to find it in the scavenger hunt, and other features like that around the Hill. Policy pitch, which is kind of like a Shark Tank on water issues. So how fast can you get your point across while walking with a member of Congress? And be able to connect with others in the water community who are or want to be active on Capitol Hill, and really be able to get some different perspectives and possibly form some partnerships that really help get things moving. $997 per ticket is what we'll be charging for that event, but with your early enrollment you will also get a ticket to that for free. So altogether, when do you need to register by? December 31st, 2013. So please do go now. Check out the registration page, waterandcongress.com, quick.html, for the 6-week intensive live web-based course, 1-year access to the recorded webinars, the private online community, $97 a month, $9.97 a year, plus the bonuses, the pocket guide, the monthly programs, the Water in Congress experience in DC, over $3,000 in value, Available now for $9.97 a year or $97 a month. Registration is open now. wateringcongress.com/quick KWIC.html. Where is your special gift, you ask? Well, let me tell you. If you go to wateringcongress.com/quick HTML and click on the second button when you register, you're going to get an additional $200 off for the annual payment or $20 off the monthly payment. Discount valid until December 31st, 2013. We really want to get moving on this. We want to get this charter class going. We want to bring in as many people as we can on different issues, different sides of different issues, different parts of the country. Get folks involved, get folks out there. So please do go and get your registration in. And I just want to leave you with this thought. Is watering Congress important to you? Do you want to know more, be heard, and make a difference? And join with a community of water citizens who are also working on water issues in Capitol Hill, getting the support you need to develop and implement your Watering Congress strategy in 2014. We want you there. We want you to be a part of this. You can do that now by registering at wateringcongress.com/quick KWIC.html. Please do this. Please be a part of this group. Please join the Keys to Watering Congress program. Thank you.